What happens when a professional athlete, a public figure in a global sport, openly praises Adolf Hitler? In most sports leagues, the answer is swift and severe: fired, fined, and publicly disgraced. But in the wild world of the UFC, the answer is a lot more complicated. When featherweight contender Bryce Mitchell started his own podcast, he didn't just dip his toes into controversy, he jumped into some of the most toxic ideologies of the 20th century. The result was a firestorm that tested the limits of the UFC's PR, its brand, and its president, Dana White. This is the story of a fighter's hateful rant, a promotion's shocking inaction, and a free speech debate that has split the MMA world. We're going to break down the entire timeline, from Mitchell's remarks to Dana White's fiery press conference, to get to the real reason the UFC is doubling down on its version of free speech and what it means for the future of the sport. You're about to understand not just what happened, but why it happened, and what it says about a sport that prides itself on being the realest in the world. To get this controversy, you first have to get Bryce "thugnasty" Mitchell. For years, he's been one of the most unique characters on the UFC roster. Hailing from rural Arkansas, Mitchell built a name for himself as a relentless grappler with a disarming, folksy charm. He hit the mainstream on The Ultimate Fighter, Undefeated, and quickly became a fan favorite. His fighting style was a throwback, a suffocating chain wrestling game that led to one of the rarest submissions in UFC history, the Twister. In December 2019, he pulled it off against Matt Sales, only the second time it had ever been done in the octagon, winning Submission of the Year from just about everyone. But outside the cage, Mitchell's persona was defined by something else: conspiracy theories.
I don't care if the earth is flat, it don't matter to me.
Long before his most infamous comments, he was known for publicly questioning basic facts. He's been an outspoken flat earther, has pushed theories about mass shootings being government-staged, and holds a deep distrust of any official story. For a while, this was all just treated as a quirky part of the thugnasty brand. He was the camo-wearing country boy who could both tie you in a knot and tell you why gravity isn't real. To many fans, it was just Bryce being Bryce. It was entertaining. But this history of conspiratorial thinking is the critical backdrop for what came next. He had established a pattern of dismissing mainstream information in favor of his own research. And in early 2025, that pattern took a horrifyingly dark turn. In early 2025, Bryce Mitchell launched the first episode of his podcast, Arkansanity. It was probably meant to be a platform for his usual anti-establishment views, but it quickly turned into a vessel for hate speech. During a conversation with his co-host, MMA veteran and coach Rolly Delgado, the topic somehow went from Elon Musk to Adolf Hitler. What Mitchell said next sent a shockwave through the MMA community. "I honestly think that Hitler was a good guy based upon my own research, not my public education indoctrination," Mitchell stated. "I really do think before Hitler got on meth, he was a guy I'd go fishing with." As Delgado tried to push back, Mitchell dug in deeper, launching into a tirade of anti-Semitic and homophobic rhetoric. He claimed Hitler wanted to purify Germany by kicking the greedy Jews out that were destroying his country. He went on to say that the books Hitler notoriously burned were queer books because, in his words, Hitler didn't want a bunch of queers destroying his nation. The most shocking moment came when Delgado brought up the Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews. Mitchell's response was blunt: Holocaust denial. "That's what your public education will tell you," he shot back. "When you realize there's no possible way they could have burned and cremated 6 million bodies, you're going to realize the Holocaust ain't real." These weren't subtle comments or dog whistles. This was direct, unambiguous praise for Hitler, laced with vile anti-Semitism, homophobia, and a denial of one of history's most documented atrocities. For a fighter on the roster of a global company like the UFC, this was a stunning public statement. The fuse was lit. The backlash was instant and brutal. Clips from the podcast shot across social media. Fans, journalists, and other fighters reacted with a mix of horror and disgust. The story soon broke out of the MMA bubble and became a national news item, with outlets like CBS News covering the fallout. The only question on everyone's mind was, what would the UFC do? For a sport that's always fighting for mainstream legitimacy, having one of its ranked fighters praise Hitler was a PR nightmare. The pressure was on for the promotion to act, and act decisively. And while the UFC stayed silent for a few days, consequences for Mitchell started coming from other places. The first real financial hit came from a sponsor. The apparel brand The Renaissance publicly announced it was cutting ties with Mitchell. In a statement, the company's founder said they could no longer be affiliated with him after his remarks. It was a clear, direct consequence. A company had drawn a line in the sand. But the biggest question mark was still hanging over the UFC. This wasn't a minor slip-up. It was an endorsement of one of the most evil figures in human history. The MMA world held its breath, waiting for Dana White to step up to the podium. Would he fire Mitchell, suspend him, fine him? No one was sure, but the severity seemed to demand a powerful response. The world was watching. Days after the podcast, Dana White was in Saudi Arabia for a power slap event. The controversy had followed him across the globe. Facing the media, he knew he couldn't avoid it. He addressed the issue head-on, delivering one of the most scathing, yet confusing responses of his career. "I've heard a lot of dumb and ignorant said over the years," White began, "but this is probably the worst." He didn't hold back his disgust.
"I've heard a lot of dumb, ignorant shit in my day, but this one's probably the worst." When you talk about Hitler, he's responsible for the death of 6 million Jews, and he tried to completely eliminate a race of people. World War II was the deadliest war in history. 15 million military deaths, 45 million civilians, and 25 million soldiers were killed in World War II. Second of all, Hitler is one of the most disgusting and evil human beings to ever walk the face of the earth, and anyone that even tries to take an opposing position is a moron.
White confirmed the UFC had told Mitchell they were beyond disgusted and called him literally one of the dumbest human beings. The condemnation was total, brutal, and exactly what many people wanted to hear from the UFC boss. But then came the pivot, when a reporter asked
Does Bryce Mitchell face a punishment from the UFC for saying
That's what everybody wants to hear about punishments. Free speech. I don't have to love it. You don't have to love it.
He explained that while the UFC found the comments disgusting, they wouldn't be taking any official action. Instead, he offered a different kind of justice, the kind that happens inside the octagon. "That's the beautiful thing about this business," White declared. "For all of you that hate Bryce Mitchell, you get to see him hopefully get his ass whooped on global television." The message was clear. The UFC was disgusted, but it wasn't going to be a censor. They would condemn the speech, but not punish the speaker. This decision ignited a new firestorm, shifting the debate from Mitchell's horrific words to the UFC's controversial and seemingly contradictory stance. The UFC's decision not to punish Bryce Mitchell isn't some principled stand on the First Amendment. It's a complex calculation based on business structure, legal strategy, and a history of inconsistent rules that always seems to serve the company's bottom line. First, and most importantly, is the UFC's business model. Unlike athletes in the NFL or NBA, UFC fighters are not employees. They're independent contractors. This is a crucial legal distinction the UFC has fought hard to maintain. As contractors, fighters have fewer protections, and the UFC has less legal responsibility for what they do on their own time. It creates a convenient distance. When a fighter says something awful on his own podcast, the UFC can frame it as the action of an individual, not a representative of the company. This allows them to condemn the words without the messy business of formal discipline, which could set a precedent they don't want. This model is part of a larger power imbalance. For years, legal filings from antitrust lawsuits have shown that the fighter revenue share hovers around 15 to 20%, a huge difference from the nearly 50% share in unionized leagues like the NFL and NBA. This structure keeps fighters in a tough spot with little leverage. The freedom to speak often comes with the quiet understanding that your real protection is your value to the company. Second, there's the UFC's wildly inconsistent history with punishing speech. The free speech defense seems to be applied selectively. Let's look at the track record. In 2011, fighter Miguel Torres was fired for posting a tasteless rape joke on Twitter. While he was later brought back, the first reaction was termination. In 2013, Matt Mitrione was suspended for making transphobic comments about fighter Fallon Fox, with the UFC calling his words a significant breach of its code of conduct. And it isn't just about fighters. In 2016, top MMA journalist Ariel Helwani was banned from UFC events, not for hate speech, but for accurately reporting the news of Brock Lesnar's return before the UFC could announce it. He was punished for doing his job too well. When you compare these past actions to the Bryce Mitchell situation, a pattern starts to emerge. Punishments often came down when a controversy threatened business relationships or the UFC's control over its own narrative. Mitchell's comments, as vile as they were likely calculated by the UFC as containable. They could condemn him, call him an idiot, and let the outrage build interest in his next fight, a strategy Dana White said out loud. It wasn't a principled defense of free speech, it was a business decision. By not firing him, they avoided making him a martyr for the far right, kept a fighter with a fan base, and turned a PR crisis into a future promotional angle. Facing a storm of criticism and a public takedown from his own boss, Bryce Mitchell eventually did what most people expected. He apologized. On social media, he posted a statement trying to walk back his comments. "I'm sorry I sounded insensitive," Mitchell wrote. "I definitely was not trying to offend anybody, but I know I did. I know that a lot of people died in the Holocaust, and that's a fact. Hitler did a lot of evil things. I think we can all agree on that. I'm definitely not a Nazi, and definitely do not condone any of the evil things Hitler did." The apology was seen by many as too little, too late. The phrasing, especially "I'm sorry I sounded insensitive," was criticized as a classic non-apology, focusing on how his words were heard instead of what he actually said. He acknowledged the Holocaust as a fact, directly contradicting his earlier claim, but the damage was done. So, what were the real consequences for his career? As Dana White promised, he wasn't cut. He remained a ranked featherweight on the UFC roster. The most immediate documented financial loss was his sponsorship with the Renaissance. Beyond that, the full impact is harder to measure. However, looking at his career gives us some context. Just over a year before this, at UFC 296 in December 2023, Mitchell suffered one of the most brutal knockouts of the year against Josh Emmett, a devastating loss for a fighter who had only lost once before as a pro. That loss, combined with this PR disaster, put him in a very tough spot. While Dana White framed Mitchell's next fight as a chance for haters to see him get his ass whooped, it also put huge pressure on the UFC's matchmakers. Who would they book him against? How would they promote it? The controversy guaranteed that his every move would be watched under a microscope. He was no longer just the quirky grappler from Arkansas, he was now the fighter who praised Hitler. That's a stain that doesn't wash away easily. So what do you think? Did the UFC make the right call? Is Dana White's free speech stance a real principle or just a convenient business strategy? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the biggest controversies in MMA, make sure you hit that subscribe button